Hello, my name is Melvin McInnes, and I'm a psychiatrist and a researcher here at the University of Michigan. I am the Thomas B. and Nancy Upjohn Woodworth Professor of Bipolar Disorder and Depression. I am the scientific director of the Heinz C. Prechter Bipolar Research Fund. Ride the Tiger portrays bipolar disorder from the viewpoint of individuals who personally experience it and from researchers who are dedicated to finding solutions for the disorder. In recognition of World Bipolar Day, Detroit Public TV is streaming the document for the next day or so, and it will be broadcast nationally on television on April 13th. On our panel today, we have Ellen Forename, a talented cartoonist and award-winning author. Several of her books have been in the New York Times bestsellers, including Marbles, Mania, Depression, Michelangelo and Me, her graphic memoir about being a bipolar artist. Melanie Moisey is a writer, activist, attorney, and award-winning author. She earned the Georgia Author of the Year Award for her first book, War on Error, Real Stories of American Muslims. Her latest book is Haldol and Hyacinths. Ed Moore is a producer, director, writer, and director of content at Detroit Public TV. He is highly regarded for his insightful storytelling, which conveys often highly technical information in a disarming and jargon-free manner. Ed's work has appeared on PBS, PBS NewsHour, SciTech Now, Need to Know, and The World. He's also the winner of the DuPont Columbia Award for Beyond the Light Switch, a documentary that guided viewers into the inner workings of our existing energy infrastructure. Dr. Sue O'Shea is the director of the University of Michigan Center for Pluripotent Stem Cell Research and the Crosby Kahn Collegiate Professor of Cell and Developmental Biology at the University of Michigan. Dr. O'Shea's lab is focused on the cell-to-cell communication that occurs during the formation of the nervous system. She also heads the Michigan Center for Embryonic Stem Cell Research, which is an NIH-funded central resource for the University of Michigan campus that helps researchers from many labs culture and work with human embryonic stem cell lines that are on the approved list for NIH funding. So thank you all for joining us on the panel here. And thank you all for your contributions to this brilliant documentary. And one of the things that I've always been intrigued about in these documentaries is the behind-the-scenes work and the amount of work that goes into this. And so, Ed, I want to ask you about the energy and the activities that go on behind the scenes on this film. In particular, why the film was made in the way that it was made, and the driving factors in putting this together.
Well, energy is a good way to put it, because a lot of the energy comes through just the sheer generosity of people like Ellen and Melody for sharing their stories. It's not an easy thing to do. I myself choose to be behind the camera because I don't want to get out and tell my story. But the film owes so much gratitude toward people like Ellen and Melody and Gary and Patty Duke and Patrick Kennedy, who take some of the deepest, darkest secrets that most people would never want to get out into the public, and they put them out there. And they spend time with us, and they let us into their homes. Mm-hmm. And Ellen takes us to lakes and let us film her swimming in really cold water.
It was really cold.
So, I mean, a lot of the energy comes from the people that really share their story, which is so very important with bipolar disorder. I'm sorry, I've gotten sidetracked with the question. So,
well, you addressed it very well. Just in terms of the behind the scenes, yeah. And how you put it together in the way that it was put together. And,
well, when starting a project like this, we really had to figure out, okay, what has been said before? What has been done before in the areas of mental health? And there's been lots of stories of looking at one person really suffering through depression or schizophrenia, but nobody had really really talked about whether or not bipolar disorder, that it's a real illness. One of our advisors, when I asked him, what's the main thing you want to come out of this documentary? And without hesitation, he said, people have to know that bipolar is real, which just kind of blew me back. I had no idea that there's a segment of the population out there that still ascribe, as Patty Duke put it, rest in peace, that pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You can do this. You just got to get up and get out there and get with it. And it's not that simple. So our plan was, let's show that this is a biological illness. There is something broken there, and the best way we figured that we could guide a general audience through such a complicated project is maps. Everybody was using maps, and they didn't even realize that each other were talking in terms of maps or knowing which routes. Sometimes they said circuitry, or sometimes but in the end, what it really was they needed road maps. That the brain is made up of wiring, and it has to lead somewhere. So that was our jumping off point, really, for how to tell the story.
Well, thank you very much. And Ellen and Melody, in terms of your participation, I like the concept of the roadmap, and our lives are kind of roadmaps. I'd like to hear from you what your experience of participation was in this documentary.
You go first.
Well, it was really interesting to let somebody into the different corners of how I take care of myself in a way that's different from the way that I usually present myself. Generally, when I'm talking about myself being bipolar, it's a lot to do with the material that I covered in my book, Marbles, and the art that goes along with that. But nobody had ever filmed me taking my medications before, or certainly not in the office with me and my psychiatrist. And there were other things that I thought were really important to put in that I was so glad that you had in, like me meditating and doing yoga, because those are such important parts of my staying healthy and stable. So it was interesting and very personal.
And Melody, you've been an activist and really put a lot of energy into raising awareness.
I have.
And how was the experience here in getting it? Was this something that was similar to previous experiences in advocacy, or how was it similar and how was it different?
Yeah, so as a writer, my primary mode of advocacy is writing. I also give talks. So I wasn't used to opening up my life and inviting people into my home to film. So it was a strange experience for me, but I thought it was very important, exactly for the same reasons Ellen mentioned, because you cannot fight the stigma without a face. And stigma is, of course, a very nice way of saying discrimination, which is what people with mental illness face every single day. And these illnesses are they can be so debilitating, but they have other sides to them. And I think the most debilitating part of any mental illness is not the illness itself, but the stigma and the discrimination that surrounds it.
Was there anything in particular that stood out as being the most difficult of participating, or in your participation in this film? Was there any one thing that was the most difficult for you, or that you can identify?
I'll just say that, just to clarify, I was never delusional believing that Iran would be bombed by the U.S. was not a delusion, and it was never part of my delusion. Yeah, no, I think, but I think it's important to say, because this is we need our voices out there, and what you've done is you've given us a voice and a place, and that's very important. But at the same time, often we have people speaking for us, and when you have a voiceover speaking for you, that's not necessarily saying. So the example, for example, that I was delusional, that I believed that the U.S. would bomb Iran, made me a little nervous, because that's not part of my delusion, and it demonstrates how quickly you can lose credibility, and that even though my delusion was accurately portrayed as being that I could change the world through hula hooping, that I could bring about world peace through hula hooping, which is mildly delusional, I get it, and I do not believe that at this point. But I do believe that one person can change the world. I do believe that in the power of peaceful, creative activism. I was just at a protest last night. So in North Carolina, where I live, where we just passed a law called HB2, and I encourage you to look it up. It's horrendous. My point is, yeah, so it's something that I continue to do, and I consider it part of who I am in terms of my activism, and an important part of it.
Thank you. Sue, I've been privileged to work with you over the past 5 or 6 years, and I'm interested to know from your perspective in going into the cell or looking at the developing cell and then the cells themselves, how is that going to help us both in the present and where is it going in the future in terms of our research into illnesses such as bipolar disorder?
Yeah, the first thing that I'd really like to say is that I'd like to expand on a little bit of the detail in the film, because for the very first time it's allowing us to have living human neurons to study in a dish. And I hope that this will help to really address this kind of stigma that people face, because when we've had people through the laboratory and they look down the scope and they say, see, there's really a difference. I mean, it works against that stigma, I hope. Because it's the first time we've really been able to look at the differences in a tissue culture dish under a microscope. The second thing I really hope we can do is to test new medicines, so that by looking at these cells in a culture dish that we will be able to cut down those awful years of trying one medicine and getting misdiagnosed and trying another medicine. So hopefully that's a place we'll be able to go. I'm a developmental biologist, so I'm really interested in how the nervous system is wired. And so I think that, you know, we've got some really good early evidence that says the bipolar brain may be differently wired. So those are the kind of places I hope we're able to go in the next few years with our work.
Thank you. There are so many different topics that emerged from the film that I think are worth touching on. One of the topics that I think is particularly interesting is insight and how, you know, people recognize, you know, I think there was the word noticing when something is going wrong. And so I want to open it to to our panel here in terms of the concept of insight, in terms of noticing. And part of the mission of the documentary is to get the word out so people will start thinking about a noticing area and gaining insight. And so, Ed, how did what did you notice about people noticing or thinking through their experiences with bipolar disorder? And I know that you had a number of researchers that had personal experience, either in their family and others with the illness.
Yeah, that was probably, was one of the things that we really wanted the film to try to, you know, after the film, not just the film itself, but this whole engagement process that DPTV is moving forward on when talking about bipolar disorder and mental health, is to get people to talk about it. Mm-hmm. Bipolar in particular is with any mental illness can be such an isolating disorder. And what I noticed was once people were able to reach out, once they were able to get diagnosed, which takes far too long in and of itself, but once they're able to get diagnosed and start reaching out, once family and friends understand what's going on, once you are lucky enough that you have a sympathetic therapist and somebody that can work with you on your medications, that all of a sudden this isolation starts to melt away, and it's this very connectivity with other people that can help contribute to the wellness.
And that was another term that I was particularly connected with, if you will, was the concept of connectivity. And so I'd be grateful. I'd like to hear your comments, both Melody and Ellen, about the importance of connectivity, of engaging with other human beings.
Well, I'd say that having an emotional support system is incredibly important. But there's a certain amount of, I guess, cocooning that is, and that isolation. I guess I wouldn't call it isolation in that case. I would call it just sort of like taking care of yourself if you can't take a whole lot of stimulation, but just knowing that you have that support. A lot of the work in the end needs to be done by the individual. There's only so much that other people can do. A lot of it has to be the changing behaviors, noticing, talking about insight, learning how to notice when, let's say I'm interrupting somebody, you know, like, oh, okay, well, I know that that's one of the signs. I'm not sleeping so well. Maybe I'm not, you know, like it's the middle of the day and I haven't eaten anything yet. Learning how to recognize those things oneself. So having both of those things, having an effective treatment team, I guess, emotional support, and then also doing a lot of the solo work.
Yeah. One of the, you know, in my frequent visits to the stem cell lab with Dr. O'Shea, the connectivity is also very tangible there with the photographs of individuals and their families that have supported the work in there. And so I want to ask you, Sue, about the lab members and the sense of connectivity that the lab members feel to the people that have supported the work in that. And it does give me a sense of connectivity in seeing that.
I think that we've been really fortunate to have a lot of people interested in looking at cells through microscopes, and we've had the opportunity to really understand at a better level about what you guys are dealing with so that we feel a little bit more connected, so that we can feel that we can go forward and kind of model the kinds of events we need to model. One of the things that's really difficult for stem cell biologists is this question of education and outreach. So one of the things we've done is put pictures of bipolar neurons in our art fair booth at the Ann Arbor Art Fair, and it was the best seller this year because people can, you know, kind of say, these are my cells and these are my cells on bipolar, and it gives you something real to look at, I think. The other place connectivity comes into the laboratory setting is, of course, cells talking to each other. And we know that when bipolar cells talk to each other, they do it in kind of a hyper sort of way. And we've been able to show that lithium can actually calm that down, showing that, you know, there is this connectivity and this cell kind of modeling that we can do, and hopefully test and identify new drugs.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, to completely beat this metaphor right into the ground, there's also, one thing that the film was really trying to do too was develop this connectivity between researchers. And a lot of times they don't even think about it. But the film was really trying to highlight, you know, the cross-pollinating work that's going on in this field, and hopefully will encourage even more of that. Carl Dijsselroth is friends with Helen Mayberg, and Sarah Lisenby is picking up on Helen Mayberg's map, and it's just keeps going back and forth. And Kafui using optogenetics from Dijsselroth's lab, it was very intentional, and the hope is part of the message. There's a lot of messages in this film.
Absolutely.
Just a ton, but one is that we hope that there's continued reaching out across institutions, across research labs. Don't get siloed. Keep reaching out and finding out what others are working on and how you could best help somebody else or share research, share data.
It's important too because as they identify maps, we'll be able to go back and superimpose cell types, neurotransmitter phenotypes on top of that to model in the dish, right? So that's an important give and take back.
And then one other aspect is the mental health community and
Melody, I think it's
I
think it's really important when you're talking about things like connection and isolation to realize that the way that we treat mental illness in this country is broken. We still call it mental illness as though the brain were not part of the physical body, right? So that is a huge problem, but in terms of connection, yeah, that's huge when you're trying to get treated. What is one of the ways that we treat mania in this country is that we put people, if not in prison, where our largest mental health facilities are now jails and prisons in this country, if we don't incarcerate them and criminalize them, if they're lucky enough for that not to happen, we put them then in isolation. And we use isolation, segregation, solitary confinement more than any other country on the planet. And we use it for both treatment and punishment. It has been proven ineffective for both, and not just ineffective, but counterproductive. And yet we continue to do that. So I think part of it is how we connect with the people around us, and part of it is, of course, we have a responsibility to take care of ourselves, but our mental health system has a responsibility. And both Ellen and I have been very lucky that we've had access to care in a way that I think a lot of people do not. We've had resources and we've had supporting people in our lives. There are people I have met over and over again who their families did not, exactly like you were saying, did not believe that this was real. I've met people in the hospital who had been taken for exorcisms to treat this. So it's vital that we actually start talking about it as a real condition.
And then we also have an increasing number of different places that we can reach out to each other. Like this is the first time that we actually met. But we've we've been in contact before, and we've read each other's work. And there are other people and other organizations, more and more, that are out about their various mental orders and disorders, and organizations that have broader and broader outreach.
And I really appreciate you emphasizing these points, because you're really emphasizing the importance of the approach to treating bipolar disorder and other illnesses. It really is a connection between the providers and the individuals that are receiving the care, a collaboration, if you will. And I think that ED and Detroit Public Television has been very successful in bringing this concept forth and showing the integration and the collaboration between the interested, or the parties that have the stakeholders essentially in this process. There was one of the points that I picked up on, and you were commenting, and that is in the care of the disorder and the care of the multitudes of care that are available. And I particularly recall that there's a scene in the film where people are sitting down and having a meal, and there's comments about the importance of sleep. There's comments about the importance of exercise, and so Ellen and Melody, I'd like to hear your strategies and your how you do it, how you manage the complexity of living a healthy life and moving forward in a healthy manner, and what is, if you will, what is your secret?
What is your secret?
Honestly, for me, faith is huge, which is a hard place to be, because I had a mystical experience while I was manic, and I know that it was a valid, real mystical experience. I also know that it was a valid, real clinical experience that needed medication, but our Western medical system does not respect the fact that something can be both clinical and spiritual at the same time.
Yes.
So taking that back and being able to say, no, that was a valuable experience, and being able to be a person of faith and pray and do all of the things that and this is where I think culturally competent care comes in. When I was in the hospital, I was praying, and as a Muslim, I pray in a very certain way that if you're in the middle of Ohio, the only way people in this hospital had ever seen people praying that way were terrorists, right? That's all they'd associated it with, right? And on TV, right? So they considered it symptomatic, and not just symptomatic, but even worse, and they kept marking it as being symptomatic in my file, when the truth is, it was one of the things that helped me through it. So it gets back to how the system needs to change, too.
This is actually what my next book is about, is maintaining. So Marbles is about when I was diagnosed, and then the years that I struggled to figure out what my medications and treatments would be to keep me stable. And then over the years, really figuring out how to keep myself there. And so a lot of it is, what we've just talked about was sleep, yoga, and exercise, a certain amount of routine that one of the people in the film said, certainly keeping up on my meds, and I still see my psychiatrist once every 3 months now, graduating to further and further, and really just very in the back of my mind, keeping an eye out for red flags. And for the most part, they're just a part of my consciousness now. It's all about taking care of myself. Taking my meds now is just about taking care of myself.
Right, okay. In terms of living one's life, now both of you are very creative, award-winning, highly productive and successful people. And the question I have relates to creativity, and there are many, there have been statements that have been, or books that have been published on creativity, Touched with Fire, as an example. So I'd like you to address creativity in bipolar disorder for us, if you may.
I think it's really tricky to try to pull apart all of the different issues. In bipolar disorder in general, I mean, it's something that we've talked about both separately and together. Like, what are the aspects of it that we have found positive? What are the aspects of it that are inseparable from who we are? That whole question, if there were a cure, would I want to be cured? I don't know, what would I be cured of, right?
Yeah.
So it's really tricky. I mean, like, I don't want to cycle ever again. But it's a tricky issue. So here I am pointing to my book again. It's this is about what bipolar disorder has meant for me as an artist. And when I was first diagnosed, being, you know, dismayed, but then also, like, I was officially a crazy artist. So there was something to that. But then after the really difficult time of figuring out how to take care of myself and how to be stable, really was able to take a look at what is that just a myth, the crazy artist, and or not, or is there something to it? And then if there is, then what would treatment mean, and what would being stable mean?
And I mean, I think we can both agree that we produce our best art when we are healthy.
When we're healthy.
So I don't. What I produce when I'm manic is straight up crap. So I'll say that outright.
I mean, one of the things that I conclude is that when I'm manic, I'm way too distracted to produce much of anything, and then depressed, you know, I'm just way too low and foggy either. So so stability, definitely. But where does inspiration come from, and what about all the artists through history? There are all of these different studies, but a lot of them are flawed, and you know. So I think I mean, I guess I will just conclude, it's tricky.
It's tricky. That's sort of bipolar in a sense. It sort of goes up and down a little bit. I really appreciated the point that you made about stability, however, and I think that is something that really came through in the documentary, and I so appreciated the importance of eating. And just to share with you, one of my postdocs a number of years ago had bipolar, and that individual informed me that you have to appreciate that it is really important for me to be stable and to be able to think these things through. I'm not creative, when things are amiss. Now there's been some discussion around the medications and the other kind of healthy strategy, healthy living, which is important. But there's one other element of the treatment that we discussed a bit, or that was discussed a bit, and that was talk therapy. And so, Ed, I'd like to hand it to you to share with us what you learned about talk therapy doing this film.
Before starting this film, I mean, this was such a big learning curve for me, coming into this knowing really nothing about bipolar disorder. And to me, I hate to say it, but talk therapy, I thought it was more like you just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Do you really need to go and talk to somebody else? How does this really work? I don't get it. It just seemed like Bob Newhart kind of stuff. You know what I mean? That was about my knowledge of talk therapy. But it was really understanding brain plasticity. And it wasn't just talk therapy that I had this kind of breakthrough with in researching the film and talking to all of our subjects. But it was, Tom Insel brought up, learning to play a violin, learning a new language, talking to people. Everything you do, you're helping to rewire your brain. And that's when the light bulb clicked on for me, and now I really would like. I would have liked to have delved into it even more, because I started to find it really fascinating, especially the family-focused therapy as well. How you talk to each other means a lot. How the families, we say in the documentary that sometimes parents that have bipolar disorder raising children, you know, sometimes the parenting is erratic. And, you know, maybe there are outbursts, things are said, you know, and so like learning what those fuse points are and like navigating around those, learning how to deal with each other means a lot as well. So yeah,
it's important.
I'm a believer now.
Great. Sue, I have a question. I have a question for Sue with regards to the rewiring of the brain. Now, when we think of development, the developing brain, we think of, you know, younger people and that. But is it the perspective in developmental biology that the brain continues to develop? I mean, can we be, to what degree can we be forming new connections in our brain?
Well, I think it's new connections, but it's also new neurons.
And new neurons.
So everybody's mom told you not to drink, right? You've got all the neurons you're ever going to have, so don't destroy them. But there are a couple of places of persistent neurogenesis in the brain that new brain cells continue to form. And if we could think about harnessing those or causing them to migrate to the place that they need to be to replace broken circuits, that could be really great. So, yeah.
Whiskey's all around? Was that?
That's very encouraging.
I don't think that's one of those things that stimulates neurogenesis.
That's very encouraging.
But you know, some of the other things that you were talking about holistically, you saw places light up in the brain that I wouldn't have suggested or guessed at. So, you know, I mean, combinations of increased neurogenesis and plasticity could be really important.
So there was a comment made about healthcare in general and where things are going, and concerns that were raised about, you know, I think the comment was made about, you know, where healthcare is being delivered to a great degree in our prison system, and so, you know, with the documentary, we're increasing awareness and increasing discussion. Where should the discussion go in terms of how we, as a nation, as humanity, should be going in managing these illnesses?
Well, hopefully the film will, as I mentioned earlier, will get people talking about mental illness as a biological issue. Because if we are incarcerating people for behavior that we are seeing as maybe immoral or in some cases amoral, then we're actually looking at it from this vantage point of like that mental illness is a moral issue. It's a character issue. And so once you start looking at this as a biological issue, an issue of something being broken in the brain, now I think it should force us as a society to look at how we're using the prison system and asking ourselves a very moral question: are we doing the right thing by all these people? So I think it's really starts, you know, bringing up questions of what is morality really. And I think these are really difficult issues that philosophers really should get involved in, as well as you know, neuroscientists. And we should be coming together and figuring out what are we doing? Is this the best path forward?
Can I say something about that? One of the things I really liked about the way you put the film together was that you put the research out there. It's not hidden. I mean, we're not in some electrical cage somewhere doing research, that it's just an integral part of understanding. And, you know, that's something that's really difficult to do, and it really impinges on funding for research and, you know, eventually understanding these conditions in a meaningful kind of way. But it really put the research at the forefront, I thought, in a good way.
Can I just add,
Please.
One of the big things is ending the way we treat drug abuse in this country. Substance abuse is treated as a crime as opposed to a public health issue, and we need to start treating that as a public health issue. Once we do that, then we can stop the mass incarceration of disproportionately people of color and people with psychiatric conditions. Once we stop mass incarcerating them, then we might be able to start fixing our mental health system. But until we stop doing that,
yes,
I don't think it's going to change.
So thank you. We're fielding questions here on our cards from the audience, and there's one question that comes up: is can you explain how bipolar disorder is diagnosed? Do you feel the disorder is overdiagnosed? And so let's start with the final question. Do you think it is overdiagnosed in thinking into your advocacy experiences and interacting with people?
You know, it's really hard to say. I think for years it was underdiagnosed.
Yeah.
Bipolar disorder, a lot partly because of the shame involved, partly because bipolars have a tendency to think there's a problem when depressed, right, and would be misdiagnosed depressed. And I think that there really is a swing right now towards pathologizing different behaviors and ways of thinking. And so, and then just the healthcare system is kind of nutty right now, and a lot of general practitioners are doing the diagnosing. And
Right.
I know that some friends come to me and they diagnose bipolar, and I know that they have something of a problem with anxiety sometimes, and they get down, but they don't need to be on all those medications, and they're not getting any follow-up. So there are a lot of diagnoses. Then there's pediatric,
Yeah, that I would
bipolar,
say
which is
definitely
really
with
controversial.
Pediatric, I think
you
is
know.
overdiagnosed, is becoming overdiagnosed. And sure, it was underdiagnosed for a while, but in pediatric, I think in kids, I'm seeing it more and more as almost pathologizing childhood. Your kids will be obnoxious. That's childhood, you know? I mean, I don't think they're going to be the heavy mood swings, right? That's adolescence.
Yeah.
So it's hard to see the difference when it
Yes.
comes to young people in particular.
That's why I think the biomarkers are going to be such a big, such a crucial piece of this puzzle. And the one thing that I was really happy that we could surface was cognitive testing. I think will unveil a lot. I think it's going to be really difficult to just come up with a blood test, you know, and an imaging
So
test.
they're trying. They're
Yeah.
trying.
Yeah, speaking as one of the psychiatrists in in this team, I consider myself part of your team. Then the illness is diagnosed just with establishing the presence or absence of criteria. And one good friend of mine said, bipolar disorder is really, it's like you said, it's up and down. It's both overdiagnosed and underdiagnosed, and so there's a subtle irony to that. And one came up here. What can you comment? It's directly for you, Ed. Can you comment on the title of the film, Ride the Tiger?
Ride the Tiger was a holdover from a research that we had been doing, and the film started off originally in a much more narrow way, and we were looking at a phenomenon of a lot of entrepreneurs that happened to be diagnosed as bipolar.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a phenomenon called riding the tiger, where an entrepreneur, when he's in the middle of a startup and he's got to get a lot of work done, or she needs to get a lot of work done and needs to be incredibly charming, all the things you associate with being an entrepreneur and selling yourself and selling your business and coming up with lots of great ideas, of going off their medication to drive themselves into hypomania. And that was called Riding the Tiger. But we still felt the title was still very appropriate, because the Riding the Tiger is an old Chinese proverb, or a proverb from Asia, that goes, he who rides the tiger is afraid of the dismount. And so to me, that always was very evocative of the hypomanic phase, and then riding the tiger into the manic phase, and then the drop off into depression. And I realize not everybody's experience of cycling is like that, but I just felt like it was a very evocative title of what some people go through when cycling through the different stages.
My next question is, why do you say being bipolar versus having bipolar? And so the comment with the question is that language surrounding how we conceptualize or refer to it or reference is important. And so, why? I think this is why say crazy, or what? So it's the semantics and the words around it are important. And so, put it to you, Alan and Melody, about how to address,
Right.
It's really a semantic question and a question of meaning.
Right. No, I get it. I mean, and I think it's an important thing. Like, you know how that is if you have a kid and they are behaving badly, you say, you are behaving badly. You don't say, you are bad.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it's the sort of identifying thing. So it's the idea of taking on this identity and accepting the things that go along with it. Now, that would be a bad thing, right? Personally, I say that I'm bipolar. At the same time, I am a swimmer. I am a cartoonist. I am bipolar, and taking that on myself and having that be a part of just who I am, I have found allows me to feel stronger about it and to take care of myself and my disorder effectively. So, and some people feel very strongly that it's something that they have and not something that they are, and I totally get that. So I think it's kind of personal preference and something that I wouldn't put down as a blanket parameters for everyone.
And I think you can tell, especially with the word crazy, I think you can tell when somebody's using it as a pejorative, and I think I use the word crazy to mean not sane, and I am currently sane. One thing I think in the film that wasn't mentioned, rightfully so, because it's not part of what the film was about, but one of those things is the fact that people with bipolar disorder, most of the time, we are euthymic. We spend it in, just like the rest of you, just a little smarter and better, but just like the rest.
I agree.
Right.
Yeah.
No.
Well, just like the rest of
But I think you can tell when somebody's using the word crazy
Right.
as a pejorative, and I'm owning it personally. I use it a lot in my books.
And I think that really brings out a couple of points, and one of the frustrating things about the wording and the semantics, in psychiatry, is that that many of the terms have a meaning from the medical perspective or a medical point of view, like depression, and then the man, if you will, the man on the street, has an idea of what it is like to be depressed, and so, so that's, again, it's a problem of language in how we're referring to it.
Well, there's also an aspect of everybody that we met, there was like some level of just finally kind of accepting. We met a lot of people that had relatives. Some of the people that we filmed had relatives that were also, to them, clearly bipolar, or had bipolar, and but they weren't at that stage yet where they were willing to grapple with it, be diagnosed, then go on the journey toward becoming stable and doing the things that you need to do to become stable.
Right.
Getting plenty of sleep, getting proper medication. So I think there's an aspect of this, and it wasn't with them. I'm not trying to make a blanket statement, but with several people that we did interview and people that were associated with them, there had to be this level of kind of accepting it, and I kind of feel like that's maybe what you're referring to, that this is part of me, I'm taking this on now, and this is how I'm going to order my life.
Right. Well, one of the most enviable positions that you were in making this was interacting with such a wide range of researchers in the field, and in many ways, you've interacted with more researchers from a wide range of fields than the average researcher has themselves, and so you're in a very interesting position. So I feel authorized then to ask you the following question about the future of research, which came from the audience. Came from an audience member. Okay. So what is the future of the research for bipolar disorder? Phil is mentioning, cell phones and technologies and, a lot of things in that dimension. So where are things going?
If I knew that, that's where I'd put all my retirement funding, and that's where I'd be placing my bets. I don't know, but I can say that the future will be and has to be a breakdown between the different disciplines to where they're all working together. I think that's the only way we're going to make any kind of headway into mental illness, writ large. It's going to be engineers becoming, both Kafwe and Carl Dijsselroth are not only neuroscientists, but they're engineers, and they also have a clinical practice as well. They're also psychiatrists. So that they can see, okay, I'm meeting my patients in therapy, I'm seeing this side of it, then I'm going off and I'm doing my engineering research to solve this particular problem, and then you go back and kind of see how this is all. And it's just going to be a breakdown between all these disciplines to where everybody's kind of sharing and working back and forth. We tried not to put any kind of emphasis on one area of research, but just to kind of give a broad overview of what we found were some of the most compelling technologies that were out right now. And a lot of that I have to attribute to help from Dr. Insel, who at the time was the director of the National Institute of Mental Health.
Right.
Gave a lot of guidance, as did Dr. Keck as well.
Absolutely. There's a question that came up here. So how can I become involved in bipolar research? And I think that I could take authority here to sort of answer that because many of the people that were on the film are my colleagues and friends, and certainly each academic institution has an enterprise at their institution that is engaged in research. So one can start by looking up the local academic center where one resides. Here at the University of Michigan, we also have an extensive research program in bipolar disorder, and that is sponsored by the Heinz C. Prechter Bipolar Research Fund here. And so they just start looking up prechterfund.org. We can find that. We engage people all the time in research. One of is we're staying on research here, and it looks into looking at asks about looking into the premorbid or the prodromal elements of bipolar disorder. And so I think this is something for for all of the panel to address, and Ellen and Melody in particular. Are you aware that people are trying to find it earlier, or would there be a benefit to find it earlier, or how?
I mean, for some people, for me, I wouldn't have been able to discover that I had bipolar until I had an acute manic episode and went psychotic, because otherwise I wouldn't have believed it.
Right.
So I was diagnosed with bipolar 1 as a result. So I think catching it early and being able to even prevent it in some cases from becoming symptomatic, right, is the goal. And I think we're working towards that, and hopefully we can do that. But again, you wonder sort of about the pill, like if you could take a pill to cure it, and and I think maybe prevent it. But I know that there's something extraordinary about having a brain that works differently, whether it's because you have bipolar disorder or schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder or depression or autism or dyslexia or whatever it is that makes your mind work differently. Certainly you're going to have problems that other people don't have, but you're also going to be able to see solutions where other people cannot see them. So, and when you're talking about research, those are the people you want in the research because they can think outside of the box.
So there's weighing those different things. I mean, it's easy in some ways to romanticize, what it's like to, like the genius, whatever, thinking in this, whatever, being crazy as an advantage. And then also this, a very debilitating disease. And, it's somewhere in the middle, and it's both. So I think just that it's important to be, well, for one thing, I think that we need to be careful about what it is that we're doing, and it seems like everybody's being really careful. The one thing, I've gotten this question a number of times is how long had I been bipolar before I was diagnosed, and when is it a problem? I think is really the question. It's not a disorder until it's a problem. So if it's mild, I think it's not necessarily, in my opinion, to treat it as a disorder. Also, to follow up what you said, staying stable and healthy is really difficult. And I don't know, maybe sort of like hitting bottom, like an alcoholic hitting bottom or something. In order, see, I don't want to say you have to hit bottom. You have to you have to have this horrible episode before you can dedicate yourself to. But hopefully it won't always be that way. I don't know. I feel like I'm saying a lot of things, and the reason that I am is because there are a lot of different issues that come into play.
And I think, let me just add, I've had one acute manic episode and one psychotic break. So and that was more than 7 years ago. And I haven't, again, the reason I haven't is because I recognize when I'm going manic before it gets to the point, and that's the wonder of antipsychotics, is I can take it, and I don't take them every day, but it's something I can take, and I have hallucinations very early on, which is atypical. But I can have hallucinations one day and take the medication, and the next day I am not having them, and they're gone. And I take an antipsychotic a few times a year.
Okay.
So it really is the wonder of modern medicine, because if it weren't for that, then I would keep having episodes, but I'm able to prevent them, and that's hugely important, I think.
Yeah, so in wrapping up, there's one final question that really ties into that point in recognizing, when something is amiss versus sort of the creativity. So the question really is, in terms of acknowledging and using your creativity, how do you learn to sort out an increased flickering of an exciting, energizing, creative idea versus when that energy is a step along the lines of hypomania to mania and headed towards an episode? So that ties into our discussions about understanding, recognizing where symptoms are, and in terms of what you seem to have developed an insight into how to recognize when things are problematic. So how do you recognize when it's just a really creative, good idea versus something that's taking you in the wrong direction?
Well, I've been stable now since 2002, pretty much. And so I don't really... They're all great ideas. So I haven't really, for the most part, I haven't needed to really question that or work with that. It's a bit of a behavioral thing, like what I said, like the interrupting and not, but it really doesn't get very far. Okay. So I've really found that my creativity is much more, that I'm much more creative when I'm stable than cycling, and I know that, so I don't miss that or feel like I wish that I could have that crazy passion again, because manic, like way too distracted, depression way too low, and so
stability is good. So with that final question, I want to thank our panel for coming here today and engaging in this very and most interesting discussion. I want to thank the Depression Center here at the University of Michigan for providing us with this wonderful auditorium to host this panel, and thanking also Detroit Public Television, and to thank the individuals that have made this possible at every step of the way to make this panel discussion happen. And so with that, I thank you all for coming.
Thank you.